She surprised her husband at the airport and caught him with his mistress. Then she found the money he'd been hiding from everyone. Vanessa Coleman was 37 when she decided to skip her hair appointment and surprise her husband at the airport. She had a coffee in one hand and news she couldn't wait to share. Her freelance design business had just landed a six-figure client. Damon had no idea she was coming. He'd already told her twice not to bother, warning her that traffic around the airport would be terrible. Vanessa stood behind a pillar near baggage claim, waiting for him, and then watched him come through the doors laughing, one hand resting low on the back of a woman beside him. Her name was Priya. She was 29. The car Priya climbed into was registered under Damon's consulting company, the very business Vanessa had quietly saved 4 years earlier using the insurance money she'd received after losing her mother. Damon never noticed her standing. He had no idea that the woman who'd helped build the foundation of his entire empire was 15 feet away, watching everything, committing every detail to memory. Vanessa didn't cry or make a scene. She simply tossed her coffee into the trash, walked back to her car, and made a decision that would eventually destroy everything Damon thought he'd managed to hide. Before we get into it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. And if stories like this hit home for you, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow's story gets even more intense. That afternoon, before any of it happened, Vanessa had been hunched over her monitor for 4 straight hours, finishing a logo mock-up for a client. Something had been slightly off-center. The gap between the logo and the tagline just a little too cramped, and most people would have missed it. But Vanessa wasn't most people. She nudged the kerning by 3 points, leaned back, and there it was. Clean, balanced, clean. She saved the file and stretched both arms over her head. Through the window, late afternoon light stretched across the backyard, and the Bradford pear tree Damon had planted the year they moved in was shedding white petals across the lawn. Mostly, though, she was thinking about the email that had landed at 9:12 that morning, the Ferris account, a complete brand identity package for a regional healthcare group expanding into 3 new markets, the biggest solo contract she'd ever closed. 5 months of pitching finally paid off. She'd still been in her robe when she read it, and she'd actually said yes out loud to an empty kitchen. She'd been holding on to the news all day because she wanted to tell Damon face to face. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Damon. "Hey, babe. Traffic around the airport is going to be a nightmare tonight. Just take the car service. I'll be fine." She read it twice. It was almost the exact message he'd sent 2 hours earlier, and at the time she'd assumed it was just something a husband said when he didn't want his wife going out of her way. Damon liked handling his own logistics. He wasn't fond of being fussed over. She'd always chalked it up to his independent streak. Out of habit, she opened the joint checking account on her second monitor, the one she kept up most of the day after 9 years of handling his books. Numbers were a language she trusted more than people. They didn't lie, and they didn't soften anything to make it easier to accept. She scrolled through the latest transactions, groceries, the electric bill, a restaurant charge she recognized, then one she didn't. Meridian Spa and Wellness. Couples retreat package, $412. Charged 11 days earlier, right in the middle of Damon's trip to Brookhaven. She stared at the screen. Couples. She told herself there had to be a reasonable explanation. The conference centers sometimes bundled in spa access. That maybe the wrong card had been used. She made a mental note to ask him about it that night and closed the tab. His voicemail was still sitting there. She'd already listened to it 3 times, but she pressed play again as she gathered her things. "Hey, it's me. Flight's on time. Lands at 6:48. Don't worry about coming. Traffic's going to be ugly. I'll grab a car. See you tonight. Love you." She noticed one small detail. He hadn't said he'd missed her. Then she told herself she was being ridiculous, that it was a 20-second voicemail and not a romantic poem. She knew exactly what paranoia looked like because she'd grown up watching her mother find suspicion in everything after Vanessa's father walked out. "Stop it," she told herself. "You are not your mother." She grabbed her keys, coffee already sitting in the cup holder, black with 1 sugar, exactly the way Damon liked it. The Ferris confirmation was printed and folded in her coat pocket. She backed out of the driveway and merged onto the interstate, the radio low, the whole evening somehow carrying the feeling of something special. 35 minutes later, she parked at Riverton Metro, checked her lipstick in the visor mirror, and walked toward baggage claim, coffee in hand, coat buttoned, smile already in place. The board showed his flight from Brookhaven had landed on time. 6:48. She watched the crowd. Business travelers dragging rolling suitcases, a family wrestling a stroller, a young man bouncing on his heels with a bouquet of flowers. Then she heard him before she saw him. That laugh. Big, easy, completely unguarded. The laugh Damon had when he forgot about everything else and simply relaxed into the moment. She knew that sound the way she knew a song she hadn't heard in years, and she recognized it somewhere in her chest before her mind even caught up. She turned and saw him coming through the doors, his carry-on rolling behind him, his jacket over one arm completely focused on the woman walking beside him. She was maybe late 20s, curly hair loosely pinned up, gold earrings swinging, a tote bag with a wellness company logo on her shoulder, an easy glow about her like she'd spent the past week being treated very well. Then Vanessa noticed his hand, low on her back, not brushing against her by accident, just resting there, comfortable the way you touch someone when you already know exactly how they feel about it. Vanessa's feet stopped completely. She stepped sideways until the wide pillar beside the carousel stood between them, pressed her shoulder against it, and went still. They stopped near the belt. Damon leaned toward the woman's ear and said something Vanessa couldn't hear. The woman lowered her chin with a small, private smile, then lifted her hand and briefly touched his chest, quick but unmistakably familiar, like she was touching something she already considered hers. Vanessa's fingers tightened around the coffee cup until the cardboard sleeve bent beneath her grip. With her other hand, steady, she pulled out her phone, zoomed in, and took 3 clear pictures, timestamps included. Damon pulled his suitcase off the carousel, and the woman said something that made him laugh again, that same easy laugh, and he shook his head at her like she'd caught him in something. At the curb, he pulled her into a hug that lasted too long to pass as professional. Then she climbed into a silver sedan waiting there, and Vanessa's eyes went straight to the plate. She knew it. She'd entered it into the business records herself 16 months earlier, when Damon leased the car through his consulting LLC so the company could claim the mileage as a business expense. It was a company car. She stayed behind the pillar a moment longer while the hall kept moving around her, suitcase wheels rolling across tile, announcements echoing overhead. Everything sounded distant, almost unreal, like she was watching it all through a sheet of glass. Then her mother's face came to her, unbidden. Vanessa remembered her sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, surrounded by papers she didn't understand, crying so quietly there was barely a sound. Vanessa had been 13, watching her mother discover accounts she'd never known about, money that was already gone, a lawyer her father had quietly hired 7 months before he ever admitted there was a problem. He'd had a head start. Years later, her mother said something Vanessa never forgot, and I was the last to know. Vanessa looked down at the coffee still in her hand, walked to the trash can near the exit, and dropped it in. It landed at the bottom with a hollow thud. She didn't wait for Damon to come back through those doors. She didn't call his name, and she didn't hand him the Ferris confirmation folded in her coat. She walked straight to the parking garage, found her car, and pulled into the slow-moving airport traffic. She didn't cry. She didn't turn on the radio. She simply drove home with both hands on the wheel while a new list started forming in her mind, an entirely different kind of list than the one she'd started that morning. Damon walked through the front door at 7:38, his bag bumping over the threshold, his voice carrying through the hallway before he'd even crossed it. "Baby, I'm home." Vanessa was standing at the counter, calmly slicing a tomato. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, how was the flight?" He dropped his bag by the stairs, kissed her cheek, and smelled like the airport mixed with cologne. Her cologne, actually. The bottle she'd bought him for Christmas. She noticed the detail and quietly filed it away. "Smooth," Damon said, opening the fridge for a water. That retreat actually did what it was supposed to, got me looking at the Halston pitch in a completely different way. He settled onto a stool at the island and started talking, filling the room with his voice the way he did when he was in a good mood. And tonight, he was clearly in a good mood. He told her about the facilitator, some leadership consultant who'd convinced him to rethink his whole client strategy. Vanessa listened while she stirred the sauce, asking small questions that kept him going, watching him the way she'd once reviewed quarterly financial reports, searching for the one number that didn't belong. His eyes were bright, his shoulders were relaxed. He finished everything on his plate and complimented the food twice. No strange pauses, no over-explaining, nothing that suggested he was nervous. He wasn't acting like someone hiding anything. He was simply completely comfortable. And somehow that was almost the worst part. Vanessa even laughed at one of his jokes. It didn't feel forced. The laugh came out naturally enough, even though there was nothing real behind it. She'd always been good at keeping her expression normal when her mind was somewhere else entirely. After dinner, Damon settled in front of the television, while she cleaned the kitchen at an unhurried pace. Everything sounded ordinary, just another evening. Around 10, he started yawning, said the travel was catching up with him, and headed upstairs, kissing the top of her head as he passed. "Don't stay up too late." "I won't," she said. She stayed on the couch another 25 minutes, listening carefully to the sounds from upstairs. Him moving around, the shower running, then quiet. Once the house had settled, she stood, took her phone off the charger, and walked to the back of the house. She went into her office and quietly closed the door. Then she switched on the desk lamp and called Renata. Renata answered on the third ring. "It's almost 10, she said, not annoyed, just aware of the time. "I know," Vanessa replied. "I need to ask you something." There was a short silence. Renata heard something in those 6 words that most people would have missed. That was exactly why Vanessa had called her. Okay, Renata said, her voice quieter now, more serious. What do you need? I need you to check the business accounts, Vanessa said. Damon's Consulting LLC. Do it quietly. I need to know if there's anything that doesn't add up. Payments that shouldn't be there. Transfers I wouldn't have authorized. Anything unusual. Renata didn't ask why. She didn't ask what had happened, or if Vanessa was okay, or whether she was sure about this. Those simply weren't the kinds of questions Renata asked. How far back? She asked instead. Start with the last 12 months. I can give you red access by tomorrow morning. I still have the login credentials. I'm the one who originally set up the system. I know you are, Renata said. Send everything when you're ready. I'll be careful. I know you will, Vanessa said softly. Thank you. She ended the call and sat for a moment with both hands flat on the desk, staring at the wall of shelves across from her, where the small framed print her mother had given her still sat. Measure twice. She switched off the lamp, went upstairs, and slipped into bed beside Damon in the dark. He was already deeply asleep. She wasn't going to confront him on a feeling and hand him a chance to explain it away. First, she was going to find out exactly how far this went. Only then would she decide what to do. Renata's text arrived Tuesday afternoon, short and direct. Found something. Come in person. Don't bring him. Vanessa told Damon she was meeting a client for a portfolio review. He was already absorbed in his laptop and just nodded without looking up. She drove the 15 minutes to Renata's house in the Elm District. Renata opened the door before Vanessa even knocked. Come in, she said. Coffee's on. Renata's home office was full of the usual signs of someone who thought in systems. 2 monitors, a laser printer humming on a side table, file folders and neat handwritten labels, a whiteboard covered in columns. All of it now turned toward Damon's business. She poured 2 mugs without asking how Vanessa took hers. She already knew. Sit down, she said, then slid a stack of documents across the desk, tapping the top page. Priya Lansing. She's listed in the LLC's vendor records as an independent contractor. Category, Wellness Consulting. Vanessa looked down. The invoice had clean formatting, a professional header, a license number printed along the bottom. She's been receiving payments from the business account for 7 months. Renata continued. 44 payments, ranging from $650 to $1,800 each. She flipped to the second page and tapped the highlighted total. $38,400. Is there any documentation? Vanessa asked, her voice staying calm and even. Contracts, deliverables, meeting notes, anything? Nothing, Renata said. No scope of work, no service agreement anywhere in the records. Every invoice just says monthly wellness consulting retainer and a date. That's it. Vanessa picked up the invoice and studied the license number. It was legitimate. She could tell from the format, the prefix, the way it was structured. That's her actual coaching license, she said. Yes, Renata replied. I checked it against the state registry this morning. It's real. She didn't create a fake identity or hide behind a shell company. She used her own name and her own license number on every one of these invoices. Which account were these coming from? Renata slid another page toward her, and Vanessa recognized the account number immediately. The company's operating account, the same one she'd spent nearly a year stabilizing after Damon's biggest client had unexpectedly walked away, the same account she'd rebuilt with $45,000 from her mother's insurance payout, carried to the bank in a cashier's check 4 years earlier, 6 months after the funeral. Damon had never known how close his business had come to collapsing. She'd simply stepped in and fixed it, the way she handled everything. That money was sitting in this account, and now $38,000 of it had been quietly transferred out over 7 months to a woman who'd been sleeping with her husband. Vanessa didn't clutch the desk or let herself fall apart. She stayed perfectly still. She knew, she said. It wasn't really a question. She signed the invoices, Renata replied quietly. She knew exactly what she was putting her name on. 7 months. $38,000 her mother had carefully maintained for 28 years on a teacher's salary because she believed what you leave behind for your children says more about you than almost anything else. Now it had been taken out in quiet increments to fund whatever this relationship was. Can you print me a complete copy of everything? Vanessa asked. Every invoice, every transaction, the account summary. Already done, Renata said, sliding a sealed manila folder across the desk. Organized by date, oldest to most recent. Thank you, Vanessa told her, for being careful, for doing this right. Renata gave a small nod. That's the only way I know how to do it. Vanessa drove home with the folder on the passenger seat where she could watch it, locked it inside the drawer she'd installed years earlier for client contracts, and opened a blank document on her laptop. Not a letter, not a confrontation. There was nothing emotional about it. Just a clean list of dates, Amounts, names, and account numbers, built with the same care she brought to every serious project. On Wednesday, Vanessa made Damon's favorite dinner: smothered pork chops, rice, and homemade cornbread, cloth napkins, the good glasses out. She asked about his week and listened closely, her eyes warm and open. Damon talked easily, the way he did when he felt completely safe, and casually mentioned he might have to travel again in a few weeks. Where this time? She asked, keeping her voice light. Probably Brookhaven again, he said. There's a project down there I'm trying to finish. Vanessa nodded, sliding his plate in front of him. I'll make sure your dry cleaning is ready. He smiled at her, relaxed and uncomplicated, like a man who believed he was completely safe. Thursday evening, his phone sat on the counter while he showered upstairs. Vanessa was at the sink when she noticed it and picked it up the way someone checks the time. The message thread was already open, the name at the top just P. The newest message read, Brookhaven, book us the same place as last time. Damon had answered, already on it. 2 weeks. Vanessa looked at it for exactly 4 seconds, photographed it, and set the phone back where she'd found it. Corinne arrived Sunday around noon, a small, sharp-eyed woman with close-cropped silver hair and the deliberate posture of someone who'd spent years learning how to keep her thoughts hidden. She brought a sweet potato pie and put herself to work slicing tomatoes at the cutting board, the way it had always been between them. Damon stayed through dinner, relaxed and charming, the way he always got around his mother, then excused himself for a work call and disappeared upstairs. Corinne watched him go. Then she slowly set down her fork, folded her hands on the table, and looked directly at Vanessa. You're being too careful, she said. What do you mean? I mean, you've been hosting since I walked through the door. But hosting isn't the same thing as being okay. I know the difference. The kitchen went quiet. From upstairs came the faint, muffled sound of Damon's voice. Vanessa held Corinne's eyes and said nothing. Corinne nodded slowly. His father did the exact same thing, she said. Kept everything looking perfectly smooth on the surface. By the time I found out the truth, there was almost nothing left to find. I should have looked sooner. I knew I should have, but I didn't. She looked back up. There's a property, she said, her voice quiet and steady. Out in Ashwood. His father bought it years ago and left it in Damon's name after he passed. It was never formally transferred. Damon's been renovating it. He put on a new roof last spring. I saw it myself when I drove out there in March. She paused. He never told you about it, did he? Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't have to. I didn't think he had, Corinne said. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper with an address written in neat, deliberate handwriting, and set it on the table. I don't want any part of protecting him, she said simply. Not from this. After Corinne left, Vanessa washed every dish by hand and put everything back in its correct place. Then she went to her office, unlocked the drawer, and added the address to her document in clean, even letters, along with the date and where it had come from. Then she locked the drawer again. Harold Benning's office was on the 4th floor of a quiet building on North Halden Street. Vanessa had been there once before, 5 years earlier, when he'd helped close out her father's estate without ever charging more than was fair, and she'd never forgotten it. He shook her hand firmly. Vanessa, sit down. Tell me what you have. She laid it all out. Renata's records covering 7 months of false contractor payments, every invoice numbered and dated with Priya's real license number at the bottom, the photographs from baggage claim, the picture of the P thread with its timestamp, Corinne's folded note. There's a property in Ashwood, Vanessa said. It's held under his father's name. Damon's been paying for renovations. A new roof went in last spring, and he never disclosed the property to me. Harold didn't react right away. He picked up each piece of evidence, read through it carefully, and set it back down in a straight line across the desk. How long have you been putting this together? About 3 weeks, Vanessa answered. All right, then let me explain exactly where you stand. He walked her through it without softening anything. The state recognized what the law called dissipation of marital assets. If one spouse used shared money to fund an outside relationship or intentionally moved assets to keep them out of a future divorce settlement, the court could potentially recover those funds. The $38,000 in false contractor payments could fall into that category, and so could any money Damon had secretly spent on the Ashwood property, if she could establish that the funds came from marital accounts. These invoices give you both a timeline and evidence of intent, Harold said, tapping Renata's records. 7 months. Her actual license number on every invoice. That's not careless. That's deliberate. Someone made a conscious decision to run these payments through the business because they knew the paperwork would make them look legitimate. He paused. Which means she's not simply a third party here. She's potentially a participant in the deception. Vanessa nodded once. Hearing it stated so plainly by a man who'd practiced family law for 18 years made it feel much more real. What does that mean for her? She asked. Licensed wellness coaches answer to a professional ethics board, and the rules are clear. Harold said, You can't bill someone for services you never actually provided. The moment she put her license number on a false invoice and accepted the money, she created a documented trail tied directly to her. A formal complaint to the board would start its own investigation, separate from the divorce and separate from Damon, focused specifically on her credentials and what she signed her name to. How formal does that process have to be? Vanessa asked. You'd submit a written complaint through the board's official channel and attach the supporting documentation, Harold said. You don't need an attorney for that part. You just need exactly what you've already collected. He pulled a legal pad toward himself and clicked his pen open. As for the property, I can start preparing the paperwork to freeze any accounts we can connect to undisclosed assets. When you're ready to file for divorce, we submit that at the same time before he has a chance to move anything. He looked at her directly, but the important word is when. I won't file a single document until you tell me to. You decide the timing. Good, Vanessa said. Harold made a few notes, then looked up again. Is there anything else you haven't shown me? Not yet, she said, but I have a feeling there may be more. He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Then keep digging. Don't confront him, and don't give him any reason to think you're onto him. Every extra week he feels completely safe is another week he'll probably stay careless. He gathered her documents and slid the packet across the desk. Take this home. Keep it locked up. Call me when you're ready. Vanessa walked to her car alone, got in, and placed the folder on the passenger seat. She put both hands on the wheel. For the first time since she'd stood behind that pillar at baggage claim, she felt something she hadn't expected: control. The call came the following Tuesday morning. Vanessa was at her desk finishing color corrections on a branding package when her phone buzzed. Renata's name on the screen. I need you to come over, Renata said. No greeting, no small talk. Today, if you can. How bad? Vanessa asked. Bad enough that I didn't want to explain it over the phone. He opened another account. Vanessa. Inside the business system. I almost missed it. It was buried under a vendor category he hasn't used in months. Vanessa was already on her feet. I'll be there in an hour. When she arrived, Renata's office smelled like coffee and printer ink, the records already pulled up across 2 monitors. Here, she said, pointing to the left screen. A transaction summary for a new account created 5 weeks earlier, labeled simply Future Planning Consulting Reserve. Well, he built it inside the existing business structure, Renata explained. The amounts are small enough they wouldn't trigger a basic review. He's been moving money into it in pieces, never more than $2,500 at a time, usually right after a larger invoice gets paid. She clicked to another screen. In 5 weeks, he's moved a little under $15,000 into it. Vanessa stared at the figures. He's building a cushion, she said. He's building a runway, Renata corrected. There's a difference. A cushion is something you keep for emergencies. This has a pattern. He's not saving money, Vanessa, he's preparing. Vanessa's mind went straight back to the Ashwood property. The $38,000 paid to Priya, 7 months of carefully worded invoices, and now this. Damon hadn't started making these moves yesterday. He'd been getting ready for something for a long time. She drove home in silence. The house was empty. Damon had a client call and wasn't back until after 6. She was pouring a glass of water when she heard it. The old landline they kept for business overflow. Its message light blinking red. She'd walked past it all week without checking. This time she pressed play. Damon's voice filled the kitchen. Yeah, I know. I just need a few more weeks to get everything settled on my end before I make any changes. The account is growing exactly the way I planned. Once the dinner is over and the investors are locked in, I can start moving things around without making it look suspicious. A pause, a quiet exhale, and tell the doctor we'll confirm the appointment once everything is handled. I want to take care of you. Both of you. I just need the timing to be right. The message ended, and the kitchen became completely silent. Vanessa stood frozen, one hand flat against the counter. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply let his words hang in the air until they settled into something she could understand without breaking down. Both of you. Priya was expecting. Damon was planning to leave. What Vanessa had witnessed at the airport hadn't been some reckless afternoon of poor judgment. It was another step in a plan he'd already carefully mapped out. The account, the property, the dinner, the exit. She had simply been the last person to know what was happening. Her mother's face flashed through her mind again, standing in a kitchen not so different from this one, holding papers she hadn't even known existed until it was too late. Vanessa pressed her lips together. She wasn't her mother. She picked up her phone and called Harold first. The 3-way call lasted 35 minutes. The new account gave them a more recent example of diverted money than the payments to Priya, which made the case considerably stronger. Combined with the Ashwood property and Renata's complete audit, it was no longer a puzzle with missing pieces. They had the full picture. The investor dinner, Harold said. When is it? 9 days, Vanessa answered. Thursday the 19th. He's been building toward it for 5 weeks. Harold didn't hesitate. Then we file on the 18th. The account freeze goes in that evening. By the time he walks into that dinner, the account will already be locked. Renata spoke next. I'll have the complete financial summary ready by the 14th. Every transfer traced back to its source. Good, Harold said. Vanessa, the licensing complaint is yours to file. You don't need me for that, but the timing is important. File it during the same week. Let both things hit at once. I'll draft it this weekend, Vanessa said, her voice steady through the whole call. She spent the following days building her case in silence, writing the complaint and cutting it down until all that remained was factual, precise, and free of emotion. The billing records do not correspond to any documented services rendered. She attached Renata's invoice summary and clicked Submit. A confirmation number appeared on the screen. At 8:35 one morning, Renata's email arrived with a single word in the subject line. Ready. Inside was a 12-page summary organized so clearly that anyone could read it and understand exactly what had happened. Every diverted transfer, every false invoice, the hidden account, the Ashwood property, the entire timeline laid out in simple columns that spoke for themselves. Vanessa printed 2 copies. One went into the folder. The other she folded once and slipped into the interior pocket of the handbag she planned to carry that evening, just in case. She showered and took her time getting dressed. From her closet, she chose the deep navy wrap dress she'd bought the previous spring and never found the right occasion to wear. It fit perfectly, polished without feeling stiff. She stood in front of the mirror, 37 years old, sharp, still standing. Her mind briefly returned to something Damon had said to someone on the phone weeks earlier. She doesn't need to be managed. The words stung for a second. Then she let the feeling rise and pass. She reviewed her talking points one more time while Damon showered down the hall. She wasn't going to make accusations. She was going to present observations. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about information the investors had every right to know before putting more money into the business. Priya's name didn't need to come up. The numbers would tell the story by themselves. At 7:05, Damon came downstairs in a charcoal suit, completely relaxed, the loose, easy confidence of a man who believed every part of his plan was unfolding exactly as intended. He glanced at her dress. "You look nice." "Thank you," she said, picking up her handbag from the counter. Phone, lip gloss, and one folded copy of everything Renata had uncovered. He held the door for her. "Ready?" "Yes," she said, and climbed into the passenger seat. The restaurant was called Solene, on the top floor of a building in downtown Riverton. Soft, golden lighting, leather chairs, pressed tablecloths without a single wrinkle. The kind of place men like Damon brought people they wanted to impress. The private dining room was already prepared. A long mahogany table stretched across the room, surrounded by 8 chairs, fresh flowers arranged in the center that nobody at the table had ordered personally. Owen Castellan and Julian Reyes stood near the bar with drinks in hand, along with Whitmore, a quieter man who'd contributed the largest stake 2 years earlier and rarely spoke during these dinners, which somehow made him the most important person in the room. Corinne was already seated near the end of the table in a deep burgundy blouse, wearing her late husband's watch on her left wrist. When Vanessa walked in, she and Corinne exchanged a look. No words were necessary. Corinne simply gave her one slow, steady nod. Damon moved comfortably through the room, shaking hands, patting Julian's shoulder, laughing at something Owen said before he even reached the punchline. This was the Damon people believed in. His charm was genuine. That was something Vanessa had never been able to deny. It just hadn't meant what she'd once believed it meant. She took her seat near the middle of the table, folded her hands in her lap, and waited for the evening to unfold. Dinner progressed the way these dinners always did. Appetizers first, harmless conversation, and then Damon began summarizing the company's position with the effortless confidence of someone reciting a script he'd stopped questioning years ago. "This next quarter is where we really start seeing the return on everything you've committed," he said, setting down his fork. "The infrastructure is in place. The accounts are positioned. We're ready to scale." "That's actually something I'd like to address," Vanessa said. Her voice was calm and quiet, low enough that nobody could mistake it for an outburst, clear enough that everyone at the table heard it. Damon turned toward her. She was already reaching into her handbag. "Before anyone commits any additional funds," she continued, placing the folded document on the table and opening it, "I think it's only fair that everyone in this room knows about some financial discrepancies I found while reviewing the business accounts." She slid a copy toward Owen, then another toward Whitmore. "There are unexplained transfers totaling well into 6 figures over the last 7 months. The documentation lays out the timeline and the amounts." The entire table went silent, the kind of silence that happens when everyone is reading instead of talking. Vanessa watched Damon's expression change 3 times in a matter of seconds. First confusion, then recognition, then a pale, drained stillness that tightened his jaw. "Vanessa," he started, "the numbers all come directly from the business records," she said calmly, without looking at him. "I'm not adding commentary or making accusations. Take a look at what's right in front of you." Whitmore hadn't touched his food since Vanessa started speaking. He read the document carefully, his eyes moving down each page in slow, deliberate lines. Julian looked at Damon, then lowered his eyes back to the paperwork. Corinne placed her water glass on the table with a quiet, deliberate click. She cleared her throat once. "There's also a property," she said, addressing no one in particular, her voice calm, factual, completely steady. "It's still under my late husband's name, but Damon has been putting money into it. I've known about it for a while." She folded her hands neatly. "I thought someone else should know about it, too." The silence that followed was absolute. Whitmore placed the document flat on the table and leaned back without a word. Owen stared down at his plate. Julian slowly rubbed the back of his neck. Damon pushed his chair away from the table and leaned toward Vanessa, speaking low, close to her ear. "I need to talk to you right now. Outside." Vanessa turned and looked directly into his eyes without flinching. "The numbers speak for themselves, Damon." He straightened, his jaw tightening, moving silently as he searched for something to say. Nothing came. Whitmore stood first. He picked up his jacket, folded it over his arm, and reached across the table to shake Vanessa's hand. "Thank you for dinner," he said, and walked out. Owen followed without a word. Julian remained seated for another 20 seconds, as if waiting for the situation to somehow change, then stood and quietly excused himself too. One after another, the chairs emptied. Damon remained standing alone at the head of the table, surrounded by half-finished plates and the restaurant's soft, indifferent golden light. He didn't sit back down. The account freeze officially went through that Thursday. Harold called Vanessa at 9:40 that morning, his voice as calm and measured as always, though she could hear something underneath it this time. Quiet, controlled satisfaction. "It went through," he said. "The disputed funds are frozen pending the divorce proceedings. Based on the timeline Renata documented, we have a strong argument for recovering the full amount as dissipated marital assets." Vanessa was standing at the kitchen window watching a cardinal perched on the fence, a bright red spot against a gray November sky. "How much?" she asked. Harold gave her the number. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you, Harold," she said, and meant it all the way down. Damon's investors didn't wait for another meeting. By the end of that week, Whitmore's office had sent a formal withdrawal letter, 3 pages of polished, professional language, no names attacked, no direct accusations, but the meaning impossible to miss. Owen followed 3 days later with a call that lasted less than 4 minutes. Julian sent his decision by email. The other partners took about 6 days, but eventually reached the same conclusion. Vanessa learned about it secondhand through Harold, the way these things tend to spread through professional circles. Quietly, quickly, everyone careful not to attach their name to the story. The official reason listed in the paperwork was irreconcilable differences in financial transparency, which Vanessa thought was an extremely polite way of describing something everyone in that private dining room had already understood. Priya's letter from the licensing board arrived 5 weeks after Vanessa filed the complaint. Vanessa never received it directly. Harold's paralegal forwarded her the case status update instead. Formal and procedural, but the meaning impossible to miss. The board had officially opened a disciplinary investigation into the false invoices, and Priya's wellness coaching license had been suspended while the review was underway. All of her active clients were formally notified. The coaching business she'd built, the soft pastel website, the professional headshot, the carefully written testimonials went dark within a week. Vanessa didn't feel triumphant when she read the update. What she felt was quieter than that, almost like watching a door close firmly on its own without anyone needing to push it shut. Without the business money Damon had been diverting, and without her coaching income, whatever future he'd promised Priya wasn't something he could provide anymore. The fantasy needed money to survive. And once the money disappeared, so did the fantasy. Within a month, Priya was gone. No dramatic confrontation, no public scene anyone could point to. She simply relocated out of state, took a position with another wellness company in a city where her name didn't carry the same history, and started rebuilding on a much smaller scale than whatever she'd once believed Damon was offering her. Damon didn't go after her. The divorce was finalized on a gray February morning. Vanessa sat across from Damon at Harold's conference table, knowing this would be the last time she'd ever sit across from her husband. She watched him, now officially her ex-husband, sign his name on the final documents, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly when the pen first touched the page. Oh, he never looked at her as he pushed the papers across the table. She looked at him anyway, just for a moment, and saw that familiar charm still sitting in the lines of his face, exactly where it had always been, except there was nothing behind it anymore. He looked like a storefront with the lights still on after the business had already closed. Vanessa signed her name clearly, placed the pen down, and left with her design business completely intact. A fair financial settlement, and something far more important, the quiet certainty that she hadn't let grief make her careless. 20 months later, Vanessa's studio occupied a bright corner unit on the third floor of a downtown building. Tall windows filled the space with natural light, exposed brick covered the walls, and there was just enough noise from the street below to keep the room from ever feeling completely silent. She had 4 designers working for her now, people who showed up early, asked smart questions, and weren't afraid to push back when they had something better to offer, which was probably what she liked most about them. She was also mentoring a young designer named Nia, who sometimes reminded her of herself at 23. The same sharp eye, the same stubborn streak, the same habit of solving 10 problems before breakfast without telling anyone she'd done it. On the morning of Vanessa's 38th birthday, she stood alone in her bathroom in the soft light of early morning. The mirror was the same one she'd looked into on countless ordinary mornings, in the same house she'd kept after the settlement. She was still the same woman who had once driven to an airport carrying a cup of coffee and nearly missed the truth until it walked right past her. But she looked different to herself now. She looked at the face she'd once been made to feel was replaceable. The face that had stayed composed through that dinner, through the legal proceedings, through every night when she chose silence instead of screaming. She looked at herself for a long moment, and then, for the first time in years, she smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't something she was performing for anyone else in the room. It was simply hers. Thank you for watching all the way to the end.